So before we start today, I want to just talk about something, significance of the day, because today is a day that in Chabad thinking, is in Chabad calendar, Chabad lore, and Chabad history, since there's been a Chabad, it's a very special day. It's the 19th day of the Jewish month of Kislev. And while Chabad, like in any community, has its special days. This great leader was born, passed away, something happened. The 19th of Kislev, or as we call it, Yud Tes Kislev, the Yud is in Hebrew, the letter, Hebrew, the Hebrew letter. I'm just going to shut something so there's no interruption. Yud is a letter that has a numerical equivalent of 10, Tet of 9. So it's any month. It's when you say it's the 19th of the month. In the hood, they call it the Yud Test at 9th. That's how we say the 19th of the month. So Yud Test of Kislev is a special day. And it's so special, really, that in Chabad thinking, it's called a holiday. If you speak to a Chabadster today and you say Good Yom Tov, they'll know what you're talking about, and you'll probably get a chuckle. If you speak to any other connected Jew, not of Chabad, and say Good Yom Tov, they'll think you're a little crazy because it's not going to be Yom Tov in their part of the world, but it is considered a Yom Tov. And it's actually considered, we call it the Rosh Hashanah for Chabad Hasidic thought and Chabad Hasidic life and behavior. And the reason for that is because this whole Chabad journey really stems from something that came about before Chabad. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about it, just to mark the day. Chabad is a Hasidic stream, and it's a Hasidic stream that is part of a larger Hasidic constellation. And Hasidism began before there was a Chabad. Hasidism began with the Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and it's in the 1600s and early 1700s, and he was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And the Hasidic movement was a drive within observant Jewry, because every observant Jews are also humans and given to the human frailties, and sometimes that means overemphasizing or underemphasizing something. We're not consistent as individuals or as people. I mean, obviously we try to be consistent, but it's not easy. And society has gone in even observant society has gone in different directions at different times. And there was a feeling within the observant, from some quarters within the observant community, that the Torah community had especially given all of the terrible, horrible persecutions that Jews went through from the Middle Ages, and then the 1500s, the 1600s were horrible in Eastern Europe, the Chmielnicki pogroms. I mean, really, really brutal and vicious and inhumane. That Jews burrowed themselves even more into Torah study. Torah study was an island of peace for them, and especially, I guess, at some level, for some people, was that the brutes who wanted to kill them outside were illiterate, and here they were able to find some sense of self and beauty in the Torah study. Now, not everybody had access to Torah study in the observant community, so there were the Jews who were just struggling to survive and make a living, and then there were quite a relatively large number of Jews who managed to really throw themselves into Torah study and to excel. And we have a lot of wonderful Torah books written from that period of time. But what a segment of the community felt is that Judaism, observant Jewry was developing into something of a caste system. Maybe that's too harsh to say, but the idea that really one's respect and value in a community was dependent on how much Torah they knew, how they're standing in the Torah community, because that became such a value. And that meant that those who did not have great Torah wisdom were at the bottom of the totem pole. And that is really not the way it's supposed to be, because we're all brothers and sisters, and everyone deserves love and respect as a sibling. And then you have some siblings who have something extra or beautiful to bring to the table, but there's the basic love and respect, irrespective of what particular strengths someone can bring to the table. Aside from that, there was a perception, and I think we can call it a reality, that there was such a focus on Torah study that, which is an intellectual exercise, that there was an unhealthy or not a less functional emphasis on the emotion in Judaism, emotion for each other and emotion for God. It became very cerebral. And there again, it was de-emphasizing the feeling of togetherness and fraternity and love and respect we should feel for each other, and greatly also the idea of showing, emphasizing the need for an emotional connection with God, and that translated into prayer becoming very dry and undervalued, even in the Torah community, because you read this prayer a number of times. It's not adding to your store of knowledge, so something you just have to get through as an observant Jew. Prayer wasn't seen as a viable, fresh opportunity for connecting with a loved one, in this case, God. So Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, in his bringing the Hasidic thought to the Torah community, he really wasn't bringing anything new. What he attempted to do, and I think what he attempted to do successfully, is he attempted to bring a course correction to the Torah community, to say we've gone a little too far on the cerebral end, and we can't unplug ourselves or stray from what the Torah has told us. The Torah we've been carried for thousands of years about the need for a vibrant and healthy emotional connection with each other and with God. And that's really where, in a nutshell, that is a very small nutshell. That's where Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov was emphasizing. He started the Hasidic movement. He spent a lot of his time in addressing and inspiring the unlettered to feel closer with their Judaism, with God, and with each other, and that in the world in which they lived, that looked very odd to the learned, the rabbis of the time. It seemed like an oddball thing to do, and frankly, probably a bit of a waste of time. And he was denigrated by some. And especially when he was advocating enthusiastic prayer, including singing by prayer, which was not part of what was done. A rabbi, actually, who I've met in my lifetime and who's still alive, but from a different stream, he actually, it was shocking to me. He said he denigrated the idea of singing a prayer, because at this point I thought everybody does that, but apparently not. And that singing, and they would dance in prayer, and he was seen as a radical and actually a danger to mainstream Torah Judaism by some. That was Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. When he passed away, he had some disciples who were very strong mystics, and because they drew on the mystical, and they went into different areas to also spread the idea of Hasidism and Hasidic life and Hasidic attitudes. And his primary disciple was a man, a great mystic and leader named Rabbi Dov Ber. He was known as the preacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, which is still a town in Poland, in Ukraine today. And the Rabbi Dov Ber, he had also his own cadre of very advanced disciples, and his primary disciple was a man known as Rabbi Shneur Zalman, from a place called Ladi, which is today in Yozna. That's in Belarus today. And he was Rabbi Shneur Zalman was a devoted student of Rabbi Dov Ber and and by extension of Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Rabbi Dov Ber started he had a more unique take, or a different take. It was on the goal of what they could do to better Jewish life through Hasidic thoughts, different than his colleagues, because his colleagues and the Hasidic movement there was very much based on the idea of attaching oneself and devoting oneself to a holy person, a mystic, a Rebbe, and being able to therefore assimilate and absorb the enthusiasm, the sense of connection that they were able to see in someone who was truly emotionally and intellectually connected to God, and they were able to bring that to their own homes, their own lives. Rabbi Shneur Zalman felt that we need to be able to put things on paper so that individuals didn't only have, it wasn't only for those people who could make it to the synagogue of a great leader and be able to watch and hear and absorb, but to be able so that they could channel and contemplate and study the ideas of Hasidic thought on their own. And many of his colleagues, most of his colleagues, felt that was dangerous, and they really needed to stay in the hands of the masters and not to be able to put these things on paper to give to the to the lay people, where they may not have the sophistication to be able to process it properly. And there is a vignette, which you may have all heard from me in the past. I'll say it anyway. Today's the 19th of Kislev, that Rabbi Shneur Zalman's, some of his colleagues came to him to complain about his efforts in putting things on paper and creating this this written science of Hasidic thoughts that people could sit and study it, and that kind of, relatively speaking, de-emphasized the centrality of the mystic leader. And they had found papers that he had printed up in the mud outside in the streets of his town, and they brought that as Exhibit A of saying, look, you're printing up profound Torah thoughts, and you're giving them to people who really don't have the proper gravitas and appreciation for them to be able to treat them properly. And look, now we found a Torah thought in the mud. This is directly, we can find causality here. It's supposed to look what you're doing. And the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, answered them with something which is really my main point for saying this. He said, he gave them a metaphor of a king who had a crown prince, and the king would do anything for his son, and of course, as a parent, loves his child, and says his child became ill with something that I guess we would probably call lockjaw today, where he could not even open his mouth to take in nutrition, and his body was wasting away. And he brought all the greatest doctors of the land, and they could not find any solution any remedy for the illness. And finally, someone from a faraway land, a doctor, came, and he looked at the boy, and he said, "I think I have a remedy. I'm not sure it will work. But if you want it, but it's something I think you should try, because it might work." He said, "Absolutely. What do I have to do?" The king said. And this doctor said to the king, "The problem is that it's the what I would need to do is take a precious gem, which is the one that's the centerpiece of your crown. Take that and crush it into a paste, and put it in water, and try and get some of that into his mouth." He said most of it is going to stream down the sides of his face, but if we can get a few drops in, it could jumpstart his system, and then God willing, he can be healed. And the king, of course, was quick to take even the centerpiece of his crown to destroy it for the possibility that his son might be healed. And what Rabbi Zalman's point to his colleagues was that Judaism, that they were experiencing, the Jewish community, was in something of a swoon. They needed spiritual help. It wasn't, even if with a person can study a lot of Torah and not be spiritually energized, not feel spiritually connected. So we're in a spiritual swoon, and we need to jumpstart the Jewish soul. And yes, some things will stream down the side of the face and go to waste, but for God's purpose, the idea of revealing deep esoteric ideas and making them accessible to everyone is worth it. Yes, some things will end up in the mud, but if some of those ideas make it into the Jewish soul, the Jewish psyche, it's worth everything. And that was his attitude and why he wrote the pamphlets that became known as the Tanya, which was actually a collection of pamphlets that he first wrote and disseminated anonymously, but that were helping your average person understand more about how their soul works, and God's love for us, and how we operate, and our ability to be connected and feel connected to God on a regular Tuesday. As I mentioned, that there were a lot of people that were in the observant and non-Hasidic community who saw this as not only offbeat, but actually somewhat dangerous. And they informed on him they went to the Tsarist authorities to call him a dangerous revolutionary, and he was imprisoned, Rabbi Zalman. And he saw this imprisonment as, obviously there were things going on political on the ground, and he was aware of that. But he said he told his Hasidim, this is really there's a battle going on in the heavens. Whether or not it's okay for us to take deep, esoteric and inspiring thoughts and put them on paper and make them accessible to everyone. And this is playing out, what the drama and this, I guess we would call this debate in the heavens, is playing out now on earth with this imprisonment. It's just a reflection of what's going on higher. And when he was released from prison, which he was soon enough, he was released from prison on the 19th of Kislev, and that release he saw as not just that now he's free, he saw this as divine vindication of his approach, that would continue to write and print Hasidic thoughts, making them accessible to anyone who would like to study and become closer to God. And that's so when he came out of prison, he doubled and tripled his efforts of spreading Hasidic thought. And that's why it's the day of his release from prison. All of the Rebbes were in prison one time or another. And the release is something, of course, we rejoice at. But this is at a different level. This is, we call it the Rosh Hashanah for Hasidic thought, because this was a stimulus for Rabbi Zalman to come out and say, I think we have now divine license to continue to write and print and spread and teach the esoteric parts of the Torah in order to help people find their personal relationship with God. So it's it's a day in Chabad schools everywhere. There's kids are dressed like for Shabbos and holidays, and there's a meat meal for lunch, and I'm wearing my Shabbos garb. It's considered a very special day. I wanted to share that. I just didn't want to sit and even though we're talking about Torah, but it's the 19th of Kislev. I wanted to take some time to recognize that. So now we can move forward to what we're studying, which is page 75. And we're pursuing here is, and we're gonna be dealing with this general topic over the next couple of Torah portions. On and off, there's this idea of what we call ritual purity and ritual impurity. And it's not like a question of sanitary or that something is wrong or it's not a moral assessment, but there is the idea, and we're going to probably read about it today, more about it. So I'll go a little easy on the preface, but there's this idea that there is a force in the world, an organic force known as the force of that God created, which is a force of impurity. There's negativity in the world, and we can be open through our actions. We can be opening ourselves up to those forces of impurity, latching onto our psyche. That type of being in a vulnerable position, that's what we're going to call impure. So one of the things we said was that animal carcasses, death in general, is considered something that is disconnected from the divine, because God is eternal and always living. So even if I go and I help and I prepare someone who has passed away, God forbid, and I prepare their body and I bury them, and it's all a huge mitzvah. But since I have come into contact with death or a corpse, I am now my position is now more vulnerable to because there's a certain disconnect from the power of the internal life of God, and therefore there's a process through which I can regain my spiritual balance, so to speak. So an animal carcass has the ability to impart this impurity, and we had said that within food has the ability to contract the impurity, and there are several conditions which I think we'll get to today, but it has to be a food that's disconnected from the ground, and it has to be human food, and that has to have water on it. And I think we're going to discuss I think we'll get to it today. We'll discuss some of the lessons from those details. Meanwhile, we'll go to page 75, verse 35. Anything upon which any part of the carcasses of these aforementioned animals falls will become ritually defiled. Thus, a portable earthenware oven or stove, once they have become ritually defiled, as described above, must be demolished. What we had said is that anything earthenware can't be kashered, and therefore this can't be kasher, so the only thing you can do is demolish it. Similar to the case of the earthenware vessel described previously, which we spoke about last week. And what do you do with it? Then you take those pieces, and their pieces can be reassembled into a new oven or stove if you wish to use them to prepare ritually undefiled food. If you want to be able to use It's only assuming that you want they're sacred foods. You're a Kohen and you're eating ties or whatever it is that you're using sacred foods. You have to use it in a sacred vessel. In other words, a ritually undefiled vessel. So in a case like that where I want to cook, I'm a Kohen and I want to cook tithe foods. I can't, and my earthenware oven has become ritually undefiled. I have to break the oven, and then I can use the exact same pieces and reassemble it. But that is in Talmudic language, we've given it a new face. It's a new oven, and therefore it can be used. But we have to dismantle the old one because it can't be kosher. Now, if, however, you want to use them to prepare ritually defiled food, if you just regular, you're not worried about the ritual defilement, and if you're not a Kohen and you're not going to the temple, that's really not a problem. Which you may eat as long as you understand the restrictions that doing so places upon you. Again, that's what I said too. It's not a moral issue, and today we're all eating ritually undefiled foods. But even in the times of the temple, if I wasn't a Kohen and I wasn't planning on going to the temple for the next month, as long as it's kosher, I can eat anything I want. There's no deficiency. You may keep them intact for use in their defiled state. So then you can use the ovens for not ritually sacred foods. In contrast, an immovable oven or stove that is built into the ground does not contract ritual defilement, even if it is earthenware. As we're going to see in numerous situations, something natural connected to the earth, it has a special level of connectedness to God. It's God's earth, and therefore it is something that's considered really undefilable. And that's because God is undefilable. And when humans have taken earthly things and created wonderful things out of them, a house and a store and a society, that's all great, but it's humanly created, and it's therefore susceptible to imbalance. But something attached to the earth is not. It still has that. It's plugged into its protection of nature. And therefore, something that's built into the earth cannot contract defilement. Built into the ground does not contract ritual defilement, even if it is earthenware. It was just mentioned, 36, that water contained in the vessel can become defiled if the carcass of a defiling creature falls into it. So you have this is a case, let's say you have a barrel of water, and that mouse fell into it. That can become defiled. What about a spring, cistern, or gathering of water that is built into our unit out of the ground, remains undefiled even if a defiling carcass falls into it? If it's a body of water that's in the ground, it's not. Then there's a protection there. Furthermore, a ritually defiled person who immerses himself or herself in a spring, cistern, or gathering of water that is built into or unit out of the ground becomes rid of this defilement, either totally or partially, depending on the situation. It's called a mikveh. Nevertheless, even someone who is inside such a mikveh, when he or she touches the carcass of these creatures, will become defiled. In order to be rid of defilement, the person must separate from the carcass and immerse himself again. So if a person is in a mikveh and they touch this dead mouse, they have to let go of the mouse and then go to the mikveh again. But so here, there's two things. There's connection with the ground, but then there's also the water connected with its source. Whenever there's a natural source of water that has purifying qualities, and even though we're building a mikveh here, and we're going to great lengths to, it has to be a certain volume of water, and the water has to be, we have a certain amount of natural water. There are a lot of laws governing the idea of building a mikveh that is, it's a what we'll call a discrete, RET, a body of water. Or a container of water. Many of those laws do not apply if you go to a river or an ocean. It has to be enough to cover a body. It doesn't make a difference how much. You don't have to measure the amount of water. The restrictions of a good number of the restrictions that apply to a mikveh that we're building with human hands do not apply when you're going to a natural body of water, because it's seen as being connected to its source. When you're connected to its source, it has the purifying capacity without a lot of the guardrails, so to speak. Now let's go at 36, the closer look at the mikveh. In order for water to purify someone or something from ritual defilement, it must be part of a natural body of water, such as an ocean, lake, permanent river, or spring. So it's a natural body of water has the power to bring purity, or it must be directed from a natural source, such as a natural body of water, rain, or snow, into a system. And that is, we have capacity and very carefully constructed, where we're going to be getting rainwater into the mikveh. It doesn't have to be only rainwater, but there's going to be a cistern of rainwater touching the water, the city water. There'll be two different cisterns, but they're connected because there has to be that input of natural water. And that these are very they're complex laws. We're not touching a lot of the complexity here, but I don't know, because they mentioned snow. It just reminded me, a colleague of mine in Pasadena finished his mikveh, was ready to roll. I think it was like May, and there's no rain. The forecast, I mean, the norms or whatever it goes in California, he knew that for months he probably wouldn't be able to get the mikveh up and running. So he actually, a crew of Chabadsters got together, some of the local Chabad rabbis there, and from the neighboring cities, and they rented a truck, and there were a lot of halachic parameters that came in that are beyond the scope of this discussion. But they drove to I think like the Sierras, and they filled canisters with snow, and they took a refrigerated truck, and they filled the mikveh with the cistern with snow, and the snow eventually, especially in California, pretty quickly it becomes water, because snow is ultimately water, and it is a natural source of water. So into a cistern, inasmuch as the entire body must be immersed at once, the minimum volume of a cistern mikveh is determined to be that held by a parallel pipette. That's a good Scrabble word for you. It's like I think it's a 3D parallelogram, small sides, 1 cubit wide and 1 cubit deep, which in turn is roughly 40 sa'ah, 332 gallons, or liters, or 88 gallons. The common, anywhere you go in the world, to someone who has built a mikveh, you know that if you say something to them that they need 40 sa'ah of water, they'll know what you're talking about, because that is the time-honored tradition of the measurement, the Talmudic measurement. We don't do sa'ahs anymore, but so it translates into 88 gallons. But the idea of 40 sa'ah is very intimately connected with the idea of the mikveh. Therefore, there are many additional rules governing the construction of mikveh, what type of water may be used to fill it, how the water must be directed into the cistern, and so on. I mean, a lot. Okay, so now we go to 76. But if the water or any of the other 6 aforementioned liquids is put on sown plants that have been uprooted, or the uprooted plant falls into any of these 7 liquids, and then after that they have come subsequently dried off, any of their carcasses fallen, and they become ritually defiled for you. So what the Torah is saying is that water is a very important preliminary in order for something to be positioned to contract this ritual defilement. And it says also that it has to be uprooted. So we have some conditions here. And I want to take a look at something here from the Rebbe about analyzing what this means in our lives. They have become ritually defiled for you. Let's go to the bottom of 76 of Chassidic Insights. A plant used for food can only become susceptible to ritual defilement if the following three conditions are met. Right? So, like I said, you have a corn on the cob, you have a piece of corn, and it was outside, or it's even if it's still in its husk, outside, it got wet, and now I saw there was a dead mouse on it. What are the conditions? That first, it must be intended for human use, not animal. I think I mentioned some of the things are not, they're animal feed. If they're animal feed, that's not, then it can't contract that defilement. It has to be human food for human consumption. Second, it must have become wet, even if it's since been dried. So number two is that it had to come in contact with water. And finally, it must be entirely severed from the ground. As long as it is still attached to the ground by even the smallest root, it is not susceptible to ritual defilement, even if it becomes wet. So this corn on the cob, if it got wet, and I saw a mouse on it, and it's pretty much uprooted, but it has something, one strand is still connecting it to the ground, it's not considered to have contracted ritual defilement. So these three criteria. So allegorically, let's look at what defilement is. What does defilement? It's distance from God, the opposite of holiness or closeness to God. The idea is that tumah, we call it tumah, that what we're trying not to contract. And tumah in the Hebrew, it means impure. What does it mean? But one of the things is that the insights into what the word means, it comes from another Hebrew word of timtum, is that it means like that we become spiritually dulled, because we know there are different times in our lives. We can see we're more emotionally available to spirituality. We're more our antenna are more finely tuned, and sometimes we're not open to it. And that's a critical thing in life. And so the idea of having sensitized minds and hearts is really important. And tumah, one of the things of tumah is that there's this feeling of distance from our own souls, from God. So one of the axioms of Jewish theology is that the closer we approach to God, the greater the danger of defilement. So here's this idea where God creates the world, and God creates a holy world with a lot of beautiful things, but God creates also this capacity for distance, capacity for disconnect from God. We all have free choice, and we all have the ability to tap into an organic force of what we call tumah, which is it's there. It's a living spiritual force that we can either feed or we can choke. And the more we feed it, the stronger it becomes. And because it feeds off of us. We are souls, we have a connection with holiness, even if we're not doing anything holy this moment, we are created to be holy. We always have the capacity for a mitzvah. If we have the capacity for a mitzvah, that makes us holy and a font of holiness. And that's where this unholy or impure organic force wants to suck its vitality from. And following that, what the Talmud says is really that the greater the person, the more attractive they are to the forces of impurity, because there's actualized wonderful godliness that's their food, and they want to be able to suck that from them. So really, in the language of the Talmud, the holier the person, the greater the challenges, because there's there's more of a concerted effort to try and have that person feed what I call this organic force of impurity. So the closer we approach God, in other words, the closer we get to God, the greater the danger of defilement, meaning falling from the heights of spirituality into the depths of estrangement or depression. Okay, I use those as examples, but the idea is of disconnect. There's a greater allure that we're not even recognizing where it's coming from, but this of trying to suck us into our own weakest parts. In the words of the sages, the greater the person is, the greater is his evil inclination. In moral terms, this graduated moral challenge is necessary in order to preserve free choice and therefore reward and punishment. So you want to talk just psychologically here. Well, God it builds it in, because if the holier we become, the more we rid ourselves of any tendencies to do something negative. And again, the negative might be just saying, some lashon hara. Maybe people are beyond doing what we consider the really horrible things. But if they're wrong, they're wrong. So these people who are more spiritually evolved, by definition, they still have to have some pull in that direction, where again, maybe not something that we're horrified by, but it's wrong, because otherwise they don't have free choice. If our progress in spiritual refinement were to leave us correspondingly less morally challenged, we would progressively lose our free choice and concomitantly any reward for our resistance to evil. Now, to get into the imagery which I was mentioning before, about this organic force of defilement or impurity in the world. In the imagery of Kabbalah, the forces of evil subsist on a very meager amount of divine life force. God created them, but God is creating them as a necessary evil. They don't. The only divine purpose that this organic force of negativity serves in the world is that it gives us a challenge, and therefore we have the opportunity to do good things and be virtuous, because we didn't have to do good things. We could have done something else. So does God ultimately want this existence of evil or impurity? No, it's for a purpose. It's only for a purpose for us to be able to be challenged. And when Mashiach comes, it says the verse says, "I will take away the spirit of impurity from the earth." It's not necessary anymore. So it has what are called meager subsistence, using Kabbalistic understanding of more some of the dynamics of the metaphysics. There's a very meager amount of divine life force. They therefore persistently seek to siphon off divine energy from holiness by dragging people into sin. Thus, the holier the person or setting, the greater the effort these forces exert to corrupt them. So if you want to get into the mind of unholiness, specifically someone who is high-minded and moral and trying to do the right thing, that's perfect prey. See if we can get to draw that person into doing something wrong, because then they get high voltage nutrition. This does not mean, of course, that we should shun spiritual growth in order to be safe from the dangers inherent in the climb toward holiness. It doesn't mean you should be afraid of being good. There could be no greater victory for evil than that. It only means we must be sure to take the required precautions. We have to protect ourselves. So how do we protect ourselves? This dynamic that is reflected in three conditions for ritual defilement just mentioned. Number one, we said it has to be human food. What is human food? Human food in this context refers to activities that nourish the divine soul, whereas animal food refers to activities that sustain the human animal soul. We each have this. The part of us is, we need to eat lunch. We have natural creature comforts we seek, and there's nothing morally wrong with that, but it's about us. Then there's the higher. It's what are we going to do for God? What are we going to do for the world? So there's the animal food we eat. In other words, there's the self-sustaining, take care of, look out for number one, whatever. And then there's the nourishing of the soul that comes from higher living. The divine soul's food is the study of the Torah and the performance of the commandments. The purpose of studying Torah and fulfilling its commandments is, of course, to bring us closer to God. But I just mentioned, the closer we get to God, the greater the forces of evil try to divert, delay, or derail us. So we want to be able to eat this human food. What is the human food? It means that we want to nourish ourselves with Torah and mitzvahs. Now, again, that means that we're a target, but that's okay. We're trying to live good lives. What is liquidity? Liquid. In this context means the nature of liquid to flow downward, alluding to our ability to bring holiness to the lowest spiritual levels. That we're not only, we're trying to feed our nutrify our souls with holiness. That's number one. That sets us up as a target for impurity, because we're doing a good thing. Second good thing we should be doing is not just thinking about ourselves, but of trying to make our own holiness, our own inspiration accessible to someone else. I'm not talking about going and preaching on a street corner, but we all have a sphere of influence, and trying to mention to people, Hanukkah's coming. Can I help you out? Would you need a menorah? Bring the holiness to the low spiritual levels. B, the fluidity that distributes the nutrients derived from the food we eat throughout the body, alluding to our ability to properly integrate the spirituality of the Torah's commandments into our very being. Here's another thing. What does water do? Water helps spread the nutrients through the body. We want to be able to spread the holiness, not only, first of all, within ourselves. We study something and we shut the book, or we shut the Zoom and we go back into life. We don't want to just leave it behind. We want to take some of that inspiration and infuse it into what we're doing in normal life, so that we've taken, that's the water. We're taking the spirituality and the inspiration and spreading it through our larger day. And as I said before, it's not only our larger day, but the people we come in contact with. And viscidity liquids, I think there's a word missing here. I don't know what that means, but it does. Where the point of it, the point there is that water has the capacity to it takes dirt, makes it into mud, so it makes it clumps together. It brings little granules and makes them into a clump, alluding to our ability to make Jewishness infectious to others. We want to be able to bring people together. We want people to be able to bring people together in a Jewish context. These are all qualities that we should aspire to in our relationship with God. So those are all really good. What the Torah is telling us, here again, the more we evince them, the more the forces of evil exert themselves against us. All of those things are good, but they all set us up as a target for the forces of impurity. So now we have the third one is it has to be, in order for it to be impure, it has to be uprooted. However, as long as the plant is connected to the ground, none of these factors are relevant. We don't have vulnerability as long as we're connected. Spiritualist means the one precaution we can take to immunize ourselves against the machinations of evil is to remain rooted to our source, to the essence of our divine soul. As long as we recall and remain conscious of the fact that we are created by God, and we when we get up in the morning, one of the first things we say is God is God. The soul which you have given to me is pure. You created it. We are pieces of God, and souls are working forward to try and bring holiness to the world. As long as we remain connected to our source, we are immunized against the machination of evil to remain to our source, the essence of our divine soul. The essence of our soul never becomes defiled, for it is constantly united with God. When the essence of our soul is roused from its dormancy and is manifest in all our thoughts and words and deeds, we are immune to defilement. And the only exception to this is when we go to sleep, because we're not going to be conscious about that. And that's why when we wake up in the morning, there is the practice of washing our hands. Alternatively, right, left, right, left, right, left, because that practice, which is also dates back to the Talmud, is the idea of ridding ourselves of any of this forces of defilement that might have attached while we're asleep, and the soul is not in its full sense of conscious connection because we're sleeping, and therefore there's at least a low level of vulnerability. I think if there are questions, we can deal with that, but I'm going to leave it right here because I'll have to start the next idea. So I want to mention that next Tuesday is the second day of Hanukkah, and unfortunately, but I have a conflict that we have a Hanukkah something to do for Hanukkah, a little program. But I don't believe I'm quite sure. If something changes, I'll let you know. But I'll send out an email, but I'm pretty sure I can't make next Tuesday. So apologies for that, and we'll get together again on the 22nd.
Okay, thank you. This was a lot this was 2 weeks worth of stuff to think about anyways.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Happy Hanukkah.